I never film this late at night, and like my brain, she's not working. Hey y'all, my name is Nat. I hope you're having a terrific day today, and for this video, we are doing my March wrap up. So okay, this is my third time starting this. We're just gonna jump right into my stats. This month I read 11 books, and between those I read 3,943 pages. My average rating was 3.9 stars, and my genre breakdown was 3 romance books, 2 fantasy stories, 2 thrillers, 2 nonfictions, 1 historical fiction, and 1 literary fiction. This month I decided to order my wrap up going from my lowest rated book to my highest. So first off is The Cul-de-Sac War by Melissa Ferguson, and this was the book for my personal book club. This was a enemies to lovers romance between these 2 neighbors, and it was pretty cute, but unfortunately in comparison with some of the other romance books I read this month, it ended up being fairly bland. I think it only was worsened by the fact that this was a clean romance, and that's totally fine. It's just not really what I want. When I'm reading an adult romance, I kind of want a little bit of spice, and this didn't have that. It definitely had some super funny moments. The pranks that these 2 would pull on each other were pretty hilarious, but I was really thrown off with this given that something that is mentioned in the synopsis that is supposed to be the driving force for our female main character doesn't even happen until like 30% into the book. And then the relationship between the 2 characters just was very slow burn. By the end of the story, it was like they had only just become friends. So when they finally took that leap into becoming a couple, I just wasn't really convinced by it. I didn't see a lot of chemistry there. Also, I just wasn't really a fan of the fact that at the beginning of the story, the male hero actually still had a girlfriend, and there wasn't any actual cheating involved, but I don't know, I guess it was just like too close for comfort to me. I ended up giving this one 3 stars. All right, so the next lowest rated book for me was 6 of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. Please don't cancel me. Let me first start out by giving you a little bit of a disclaimer of all of the stuff working against me while I was reading this. First off, the hype. This is a booktube darling. This is just a book darling in general when it comes to YA fantasy, no matter where you are. This has an average 4.43 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. That's a really high average. So much hype working against me. It was really hard not to have insanely high expectations going into this. The next thing that I think really didn't help was the fact that I started this book as a part of a 24-hour readathon, but by the time I finished that readathon, I still had around 100 pages left, and then I put this down for like a week and a half and read 3 other books. So when I picked it back up, didn't really remember where I wasn't invested in the characters anymore, and the story just, I was ready for it to end. Finally, this is the 5th book of Leigh Bardugo's that I have read, and it is the 5th book that has been somewhere in the 3-star range. So I think that's just telling me that unfortunately Leigh Bardugo and I don't really get along. I don't mind her writing, and in fact from the Shadow and Bone trilogy, I think you can really see how she grew as an author in 6 of Crows, but we still didn't vibe. Okay, now that all that's out of the way, why don't I actually try reviewing the story for you? First off, I really enjoyed the world once again. I think the Grishaverse is very interesting, and I really loved getting to see more of it, and in this one we actually got to see some of the different countries other than Ravka, where the majority of Shadow and Bone was set. On top of that, getting to see more of the Grisha powers and actually kind of evolving off of them was really interesting when it came to the whole drug aspect that was taking place in this story. This was sold to me as a heist in a fantastical world with characters that you just absolutely fall in love with, and unfortunately 2 out of 3 of those things were a letdown for me. First off, I wouldn't really call this a heist. It's more of a kidnapping. I understand where the heist term came from, but they're not stealing something. They're stealing someone. That's a kidnapping. Just saying. On top of that, the fact that this is called a heist put a certain idea in the back of my head. So when I went into this, I expected that there was going to be some grand plan, and by the end of the story, when all these bad things have happened, the leader will reveal that, hey, I expected all of this. I knew it was coming, and guess what? I'm prepared, and here, this is how we're gonna win. Yeah, no, there wasn't really much of a plan ever explained in this story, and from what it seemed, Kaz, the leader, kind of just improv'd the entire way through and got lucky. What's that line from Toy Story? He was falling in style. That's about what happened. Next, let's get into the characters. First off, I think one of the biggest things working against this when you start start out is that every one of these characters is like 15 to 18 and they're all supposed to be masters of their crafts. And yeah, no, I aged up like every single person in this book to like 25 minimum. While I do think Leigh Bardugo's character writing truly improved in this, the development of them was so much better. We had much more fleshed out backstories, which I really think improved their personalities. However, I wasn't really invested in anyone besides Nina and Matthias. They had an amazing dynamic going on between them because Nina is a Grisha and Matthias is a Fjordian. Don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but basically Fjordians burn Grisha as witches. So right there, not a great basis for a relationship. However, the backstory that is revealed between them is amazing and made it so much more fun to follow them. Also, Nina was just truly my queen. She was so funny. She was a strong, badass, independent woman, and she was just incredibly relatable. I think seeing from the two of their perspectives actually pushed me through like the last 100 pages because I wanted to see where they were going to end up. I'm gonna be completely honest. After everything I've gone through with all of the other books in this series, I don't know if I'm gonna continue reading with Crooked Kingdom just because the twist that ended up happening at the end, I feel is something that is quite common in heist books. So I saw it coming from a mile away and I was not at all shocked. Then again, as I mentioned, I'm not really invested in all of the characters, so I don't really care to see what happens. I think the next 3 books in this universe are all like over 500 pages, and I don't want to push through all of that if they're just going to be 3-star, they're decent, but I'm never going to reread it. I'm really sorry. Please don't hate me. I'm sad about it too. I really wanted to love this. I still had a good time. Like, it was still an enjoyable book, but in the end, I gave this 3.5 stars. Next up, as a part of my feminism reading vlog, and then also my 24-hour readathon, was Outlawed by Anna North. And this is a feminist Western in which we're following Ada, who is actually trained to be a, not wet nurse, what's the word I want? What is it called? Midwife. Ada has been trained to be a midwife for most of her life. However, when she actually does get married herself and tries to have a child, she might be barren. And unfortunately, in this alternate universe America, all barren women are burned as witches. So she ends up running away and actually joins this gang of other outcasted women called the Hole in the Wall Gang. They are trying to plan out a robbery to fund a safe haven for all other outcasted women. And honestly, this was a really fun ride. I'd never read a Western before, but I definitely could see connections to it with other well-known Westerns. Particularly, the ending shootout was very similar to Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. I really loved watching Ada develop throughout the story, particularly seeing how she starts as a pretty normal housewife and then how she ends being this awesome outlaw was just so cool to watch. Alongside Ada within the gang, there was, I think, about 7 other women, and unfortunately, given how short this is, we didn't really have the time to develop any of them. They each had their specialty when it came to being a part of the gang, but they didn't really have any personalities or even really identifying characteristics. I think if the gang had been scaled down, we would have had more time to develop some of those characters and possibly connect with them in the same way we did Ada. The chapters were really long and there would be time jumps between paragraphs. Sometimes it would be minutes, other times it would be weeks. And in fact, I was really shocked at one point we time jumped right over an entire action scene, and that just felt very out of place with a Western where I feel like those scenes are very much highlighted. In the end, I gave this 3.5 stars. I think this is a really fun ride if you want to try out a Western that has a more modernist and different feel. Obviously, feminism, there's some intersectionality, and although I labeled this as historical fiction for my stats, in reality, it's kind of like alternate America historical fiction, if you get me. Next up, also a part of my feminism reading vlog, was A Woman Is No Man, and while I gave this 4 stars in that video, I actually have decided to bump my rating down to a 3.5 stars. Looked at some really touchy subjects that can definitely stir people's feelings. I, for one, definitely was tearing up at different points. I think the author did a really good job of bringing attention to the cycle of abuse when it is often brushed aside due to ignorance in this situation. The story is really about the use of tradition and pressures of society to be kind of an excuse, and yeah, that definitely got my blood boiling. The women in this were incredibly resilient, and I really appreciated watching their stories. This bounced back and forth between a mother and daughter's story. In the mother's timeline, she has just recently moved to New York and has had her first arranged marriage. In the daughter's timeline, we are following her as she is being set up to start meeting with suitors. Both of these women were so interesting, and I really grew to care about them. However, some of the other women throughout the story were just as fascinating. I really loved Sarah, and I wanted so much more of her story. The short chapters definitely kept me engaged, and particularly Unfortunately, in the daughter's timeline, there were a lot of like little cliffhangers at the end of each chapter, which truly kept me listening because I needed to know what was going to happen next. However, I do think this was a bit repetitive, particularly in the mother's timeline, where we were seeing her truly just experience these same moments in her everyday life and expecting different results and never getting them. Finally, unfortunately, every single man in this book was awful. Obviously, I understand what the author was showcasing with abuse, but I think she missed an opportunity to highlight the fact that male allies are an important part of feminism and trying to create an equality between the sexes. We do see a small bit of growth from the daughter's grandfather by the end of the book, but that's about it. So as I said, I lowered my rating for this one down to 3.5 stars. I am going to put some links to Own Voices reviews in the description down below if you're interested in checking those out. Alright, so next up is Hell in the Heartland by Jax Miller, and this was my true crime book for the month. This was a web of crimes that tied to the murder of a family and the disappearance of 2 girls, and it was insane. I had never heard of this story before, and it's only in Oklahoma, which is pretty close to me, so like I need this story to have more attention. While I wasn't really a big fan of the beginning dramatizations that the author did, I did appreciate that the further into the story we got, it transitioned to a personal narrative following the author as she was investigating this crime. In such a case, it can really easily be diverted onto a different player, given that there are so many other crimes that were tied in with this, but I think Jax Miller did a really good job of revealing them, explaining the backstory, and then tying it back into the main case. I gave this one 4 stars. Definitely a really interesting case. If you have interest in true crime, definitely recommend checking this out. Next up was the 3rd book in the Bromance book club series, which is Crazy Stupid Bromance by Lyssa K. Adams. Unfortunately, this one also did not live up to the love I had for the first, but it was still a very cute book. In this story, we are following Alexa and Noah, who have been best friends, while Alexa is having to deal with the fact that her biological sister has just found her and is finally getting to meet her father. Noah is trying to figure out how to tell Alexa that he's been in love with her for a while. I was really glad to see that we had the excerpts from the book that the Bromance book club was reading back because I missed that in the second one. However, I just wasn't really as big a fan of Noah and Alexa. As I mentioned in my 24-hour readathon, I guess friends to lovers is just too boring to me. I need more drama. The family drama in this definitely kept me engaged. That shit was crazy. The couple was incredibly cute and wholesome, but I don't know, I just didn't feel quite the amount of passion in this story. Even though I think there were probably a good few more smutty scenes, that doesn't equal more chemistry. I ended up giving this one 4 stars. I think I liked it pretty equal with Undercover Bromance, but neither of them quite lived up to the first. While we're on the topic of romance, let's just go ahead and get the next one out of the way, which was Act Your Age, Eve Brown by Talia Hibbert. This is the 3rd book in the Brown Sisters series, and oh my lord, I just adore Talia Hibbert's writing. Now that this series has finished, I must find more of her books. The build-up, the chemistry, the sexual tension, it was amazing. This was sexy and hilarious. It had really well-developed characters, and I really enjoyed it. This was probably the slowest burn of the series, which not at all a bad thing, and really helped highlight how amazing Talia Hibbert can write sexual tension. The development of their relationship from enemies to friends to lovers, not to mention, this just had so many really funny one-liners throughout it. Eve was also incredibly relatable. She is truly just struggling with trying to figure out what she wants to do with her life. The story is following her after her parents basically threatened to cut her off officially if she can't hold down a job for a year. She ends up finding one at this B&B. However, Jacob, our other main character, is definitely not going to say yes to that, and then Eve accidentally hits him with her car, and because she feels so guilty, she ends up staying and helping anyway. I adored the setting of the small B&B. Like, that was so cute and just added another level of adorableness in the story and made it feel so sweet and homey. I also really enjoyed the neurodiversity of this story. Jacob himself is autistic. There's also discussion on the difficulty of diagnosing women, particularly adult women, with autism, and I really liked that. The only downfall for me when it came to this was the 3rd act drama. To me, it felt as though the issue had been effectively discussed, but apparently it hadn't. However, the grand gesture moment in the end, freaking adorable. I do think Chloe Brown might still be my favorite of the series. I kind of really want to try and reread Chloe Brown now. I think this one was my 2nd favorite, honestly. It was just so pure and wholesome, and the tension in this one was truly just immaculate. I gave this one 4 stars. Next up is Alice by Christina Henry, and this was fascinating. I adore Alice in Wonderland. It is a story I have loved for a very long time, so when I heard that this was a horror reimagining, I was on board. On a Honestly, I was so impressed with Christina Henry's reimagining of this story. It is dark, it is creepy, and she takes all of these well-known characters and she turned them into these terrifying monsters and creepy magicians and scary mobsters who are all competing for control of this gothic Victorian urban magic society. Well, the world was really intriguing and I think it fit the dark themes of this book very well. I wish it had been a bit more explored because magic was never really explained to us at any point. It was kind of, I suppose, reminiscent to Alice in Wonderland, where nothing's really told. We're just falling down the rabbit hole and seeing what happens. Terrifyingly imaginative. And honestly, it is very dark for a story that is following a 16, maybe 17-year-old girl. So definitely look up the trigger warnings if you are sensitive, particularly to sexual assault, because this got really messed up, y'all. However, it's a great story of vengeance and it's truly impressive to watch it unfold. I'm pretty excited to read the next book in this one. I gave it 4 stars. Definitely interested to see more of Christina Henry's work. Next up is a book I read as a part of my anticipated thrillers reading vlog, and that was The Project by Courtney Summers. Unfortunately, this did not quite live up to Sadie for me, but I did still really enjoy this. This story is following a young woman named Lo, whose sister, when she was like 13, abandoned her to join this cult, and Lo has recently been reintroduced to it and is trying to figure out what really happened to her sister. While I did read this as a part of a thriller reading vlog, I don't think I would really call it a thriller, honestly. I think it's more of a dark contemporary because at no point was my heart racing. I wasn't really ever on the edge of my seat, but I was still fascinated by this story, particularly when it came to looking at the manipulation of cults and seeing how they entice people. Weird and creepy topics that I think are important to look at when you are investigating cults. And honestly, if I had read this when I was in high school, it probably would have spurred a long investigation into Wikipedia of every single cult I could find. I became pretty invested in Lo and Bee's story, honestly. I was really interested to see what kind of promises and what rhetoric the cult was spewing at them was actually working and what wasn't. Particularly because of that, it made me even more interested in Lev and his whole thought processes in creating this found family for everyone and how he had managed to win them over even with some of the things he does. I ended up giving this one 4 stars. I still really enjoyed it. It just wasn't exactly what I was expecting when I went in. Next, the last book I read as a part of my feminism reading vlog was Bad Feminist by Roxane Gay, and honestly, I'm not gonna review this here because I spewed so much about it in that vlog, so go watch that. I gave this 4.5 stars. And finally, the best book I read this month was Pretty Girls by Karin. I read this one as a part of my anticipated thriller reading vlog. I gave it 5 stars. That's all I'm gonna say here. Go watch that video and watch me freaking out. This was crazy, but so good. Okay, bet that was a anticlimactic ending because I didn't do reviews for those last 2. Oh well. Alright y'all, so let me know in the comments down below what was your favorite book for the month. Let's talk about it. As always, thank you so much for coming to my channel today, guys. I really appreciate it. Make sure to hit like and subscribe down below. I come out with videos on Monday and Friday, but until then, I hope you continue to have a terrific day. Bye!